There's lots to talk about today. Isak to Liverpool. We're looking at Eze and Arsenal. Sesko, Manchester United. Xavi and Chelsea. We'll be here for the next half an hour or so. So strap yourselves in, grab a drink, a bit of popcorn. There's lots to go through. Ben, how are you, mate?
Well, it's been a crazy day, probably the craziest of an already bonkers window. And here we are again with an Isak bid. So strap in because there's still 5 weeks of the window to go.
Absolutely. And we'll start with the Alexander Isak situation because some people are a little confused by the language, what's going on. The bid went in. They're not looking to bid again. Paul Joyce has said that's not the same as walking away. What's your latest, if you could kind of break down the way today's gone and the latest understanding of this current situation, that would be amazing, please.
Yeah, I think first of all, it's absolutely that no plans to bid and walking away are two slightly different things, and it's a long window. So there's still some hope, I suppose, for Liverpool fans and Liverpool generally to get Alexander Isak. And I'll come on to that in a moment. But the chronology is relatively simple. This morning, a first formal offer was made. It was 110 million fixed and no add-ons, to my understanding. And people are a bit surprised by that because it's not a British transfer record. It was lower than the 120 million that was discussed a few weeks ago by Liverpool to Newcastle. But of course, it's all money up front. So the structure of that deal, very preferable to Newcastle. And my understanding is that Liverpool actually went in quite optimistic and bid with confidence. And they were surprised that it was turned down so emphatically and so quickly. And if you think about that confidence, it's important because if you go in thinking there'll be engagement, you're going to go a bit lower and you're going to give Newcastle United the ability to say, make it a British transfer record, put some add-ons on it and so on. But actually, instead of it being a number that had Newcastle United saying, come to the table, they did the exact opposite. And in emphatic terms, and in only a matter of minutes, as far as I'm aware, turned it down without any feedback, without any number, without any counter. And this is why, as it stands, Liverpool have decided they have no plans to make a second bid as of now. Why as of now? And why is that different to pulling out entirely? Because, of course, there's 5 weeks left of the window, and there could be a scenario where Alexander Isak doubles down. Does he refuse to return to Newcastle? Does he refuse to be included in matchday squads? Do Newcastle find one or two attackers? And is there another window when Newcastle may change their perspective and say to Liverpool, now come and get the player? And that's the other crucial point within my exclusive. No plans to bid as it stands, but they will follow up if Newcastle say there is now encouragement. So what are the terms by which Newcastle may offer that encouragement? The first is replacements. The second is maybe more money. The third is Isak really driving a move. So this saga is not necessarily over, but as of now, Liverpool have no plans to make a second bid. And then the last thing, I think, as we said on previous shows, Terry, is that there are three options in all of this. First option, Isak stays. Second option, Isak extends and is allowed to leave in a year's time. Third option, he joins Liverpool. 4, 5, 6, 7 with Chelsea, with PSG, with Man United. Nothing in that. So there's three options in all of this. And we know that Isak's preference is to join Liverpool. Yep. But now I think there are two options because my sources tell me it is untenable that Isak could just stay. In other words, the possibility of Newcastle just saying no to every offer, shutting the door, Isak not signing a new deal. I'm told on the Isak side and on the Newcastle side that possibility is off the table, and Newcastle know that. So they've either got to get Isak to sign a new deal or they've got to engage with Liverpool Football Club. But the ability 6 months ago to say, you're well paid, you're well contracted, we've got Champions League football, we're going to do nothing, the window will shut, then you'll start playing. That, I'm told, is not a possibility anymore. It's seen as untenable on the Isak side. It's seen as untenable on the Newcastle side. So we're left with both extremes now. It's either going to be Morgan Gibbs-White, out of nowhere, new deal, or Liverpool will be back. But right now, that's not their plan. That's what I've reported. And that is where I believe we're at as of today.
Could it, in terms of, I totally get where you're coming from. If he isn't going to sign this new deal, then, Newcastle have got to be careful because they're in a position where The valuation will be lower next summer because he'll go into the last 2 years of his contract. They may not get the best out of him this season. There's no point having an asset that isn't delivering, who's also going to depreciate in value. And I think Newcastle will be very smart around that as well. In terms of Newcastle bringing somebody else in, though, because we know that and it kind of overlaps with the other subjects tonight, but of course they're in for Sesko. A lot of the press, I think yourself also alluded to this. I read a lot of stories, though, that Newcastle wouldn't entertain selling Isak until a replacement was found. So let's say, for instance, Sesko tomorrow goes, I want Newcastle, or Watkins says, I fancy a bit of that. Could that change the scenario?
Yes, in short, because if Newcastle got in 2 attackers, Wissa Sesko, Wissa Watkins, Wissa Jackins, say sort of Wissa repeatedly, because that's the one that they feel the player's 100% sold. So if they can agree a package with Brentford, there's going to be no likelihood of a hijack or another club, unless, of course, Spurs come calling, which would present an interesting scenario. But I think if Newcastle got in a big name striker, it's not just that it might change the complexion. It's that there's always been a feeling over the last 2 weeks that that's pre-spending Isak money. So can Newcastle United afford to keep Alexander Isak and add a Jackson, a Watkins, etc.? Or is the outlay required for a forward of that magnitude actually prerequisite on the fact that Isak has to go? Now, some Newcastle fans will make the argument, but we put 70 million down for Hugo Ekitike. My read of that situation was that was also spending Isak money. And had they succeeded with Hugo Ekitike, then Alexander Isak would probably already be a Liverpool player. So I think there's an element of not just Newcastle finding a replacement, but if they spend serious money and wage on a Jackson or a Watkins in particular, and very possibly a Wissa too, they may likely offset that with their PSR position by needing to sell Alexander Isak. Of course, not in his entirety, but you pocket some of the money, you give yourself the ability to move freely over the next few windows, you get a replacement now, and Isak exits. But could they go and do Ollie Watkins on 250k a week and 60 million, or Sesko at 70 million plus wages and agent fees without ultimately selling Alexander Isak? I'm not so sure, because although they are PSR compliant, perhaps not by that kind of leeway for the magnitude of the names that I mentioned, especially if it's 2 attackers. So we'll never know entirely, because Newcastle got Champions League money. Maybe they only bring in 1 attacker and they put all their money towards it. But I think if it was to be 2 attackers, all signs would point towards an Isak exit. So we can't rule out the possibility of something changing later in the window. But one thing is clear as of today, that Liverpool are not going to put in a second blind bid. They're not going to bid without encouragement. So the ball is now in Isak's court. Does he return to training, or does he dig in his heels? And to some extent, the ball is in Newcastle's recruitment court to see whether they can get in other names. And then at that point, if they call Liverpool up and say, you can now do a deal and we can talk around your 110, then of course Liverpool are not going to shut the door on that. But there's definitely more pessimism than there was this morning prior to tabling that first bid.
Comprehensive update there. Viewers, stick with us. More to come, I think, with overlapping stories as well. But hit the like button if you haven't done so yet. Loads of you watching, so get it liked, get this shared across your social media platforms. In relation to another striker that is connected to this, in Benjamin Sesko, the Newcastle press, Craig Hope, I say colleague, as in your journalists, has suggested that Newcastle have pulled away or are looking like they're going to pull away. What's the latest in relation to United closing in on the deal to make Sesko the new number 9 at Old Trafford?
Yeah, Benjamin Sesko pursued by Newcastle and, of course, Manchester United. It's an interesting saga because Newcastle are quite pessimistic. They think Sesko wants to join Manchester United. That's backed up by people I speak to on the player side. But I don't think it's as clear-cut as picking one over the other, because there is a scenario where he has to pick between Champions League and Newcastle or staying at Leipzig. And that's where the different tactics of the clubs come into play. You have Man United, who are hoping to get player buy-in. Then they sense Newcastle will back off. Then when they go to Leipzig, they can maybe get this 75 million euros plus add-ons price to drop a little bit. Maybe they'll succeed. But, of course, Arsenal tried and Andrea Berta when Sesko wanted Arsenal, was not able to drive the price down. But that's certainly Man United's perspective, that you get the yes from the player and then you're in a stronger position with Leipzig. And Leipzig got no European football. They definitely need to bring in some money. So one, if not both, of Siemens and Sesko are going to go. And it's a requirement financially because they're heading into a season without that European money. The Newcastle tactic is different. They're basically saying to Leipzig, we'll pay what it takes. We'll meet your asking price if we need to, in the hope maybe that Manchester United can't match the offer. And then even if Sesko does lean towards Man United over Newcastle, he would have a secondary and straight choice to make. Because if Man United can't agree a fee or get anywhere close and don't want to pay what it takes, and Newcastle do, you in theory could get a scenario where the player says, okay, now I'm picking between staying at Leipzig or going to Newcastle. So I don't think it's a hard rejection against Newcastle, but I do think at the moment he's leaning towards Manchester United.
Sounds positive from our point of view. Any updates on the exits from Manchester United? We know that it may be put that your club have kind of stated via, I think, Laurie Whitwell and a few others close to Old Trafford, that sales are not a necessity to get this deal done. But we know we're trying to sell Sancho, of course, Anthony, Garnacho. Anything moving in those parts, Ben?
Yeah, Garnacho's hoping for Chelsea. Obviously, there is a possibility that Villa come calling, but I think Garnacho wants Chelsea. And I get a growing sense that Chelsea will place an offer in some capacity. I just don't know yet if that's going to be a straight permanent transfer in the hope that Man United's price drops. It was 60 odd in January, 50, 55 at the beginning of this window. And some say it's below 50 now, although I think Chelsea's valuation is 35 or 40 million. But there could be a scenario also where Chelsea want to try before they buy, and they try more of a structure like with Jadon Sancho, with a loan, an obligation, but maybe an override or penalty clause. And it remains to be seen whether Manchester United will go for that, because Garnacho's pure profit, and they would ideally like that money to come in now. Yeah. But if they're short of solutions for Garnacho and he's holding out for Chelsea, you never know. They might bend on the structure and back either the penalty money like with Sancho, or alternatively the obligation to be taken. So we'll kind of have to wait and see how that develops. And naturally, there's other moving parts. Like, what if Villa just say Watkins is not for sale? What if Sesko went to Newcastle? I know this is just an extreme example. Do Manchester United then say Nicholas Jackson again? And is that factored into Garnacho talk? So very much a backup plan. Man United are prioritising Sesko. They're quite optimistic on Sesko, but there could be a scenario where if they didn't get Sesko and Villa say Watkins is not for sale, you still need a striker. So I think Garnacho might be something that now develops in the first 2 weeks of August, because Chelsea have waited. They've been working on Xavi Simons. They've got Joel Hato over the line. And now I think we're going to see some movement, and it wouldn't remotely surprise me if Chelsea end up bidding for Garnacho. But let's just wait and see whether that's a straight permanent deal, or if they try and do a similar kind of structure to the one that they did for Jadon Sancho.
Makes perfect sense. Viewers, keep getting that like button hit for us. Comprehensive update on the Sesko situation. Moving to London, what is the latest with Eze to Arsenal? Is a bid expected soon? We know the buyout clause has expired. Arsenal don't seem to be too deterred by that. What's the latest there with Eze potentially becoming a Arsenal player?
Yeah, just also on the Isak situation and others, like people in the chat will say we're sitting on the fence as journalists, but it's actually not sitting on the fence. If you say to me, who's going to win the Premier League? And I go, oh, it could be Chelsea, it could be Arsenal, it could be Man United. That's sitting on the fence. I would give you an opinion. The reason why we're caveating it is because all of these steps for all of these stories haven't happened yet. So you can go on your social media and you can say, someone told me it's going to happen or not going to happen. And they probably stand a 50-50 chance. And one of them is going to look stupid and one of them is going to be correct. But journalism is about telling you the facts as of now. And the facts as of now are very complicated and potentially movable. So your context, if you're going to embrace context for one saga this summer, the most important saga is Isak. Because you've got player power, you've got agent power, you've got Newcastle, you've got Yasser Al-Rumayyan, who's a bit of a wild card in all of this. Because remember, Newcastle United do not have a sporting director. You've got Michael Edwards getting involved. You've got a British transfer record. All now in the space of a month coupled with Newcastle and not so far getting the targets that they've hoped for in the window. So add all of that up. And if you want your black and white, it's going to happen, it's not going to happen, definitive, then you're jumping the gun. So the balance and the context is vital. And if anybody tells you they definitively know what's going on with the future, particularly of Alexander Isak, they're ahead of Yasser Al-Rumayyan, of Eddie Howe, of people within Liverpool's hierarchy. And as journalists, we have to be respectful to the fact that this is a complicated and movable story. So sitting on the fence, if you want to call it that, or balance or caveating, is the best way of approaching a story like this, because you won't cover a more complicated or dramatic story in, I think, a decade of windows than this Alexander Isak story.